Ladies and gentlemen, I am super excited to have Robert Ballam with Pyro Design on the podcast with me today. So, sir, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So, just like always, I like to start with kind of what's your employment history, what are you doing currently, and then if you could even describe what you do with your job.
Okay. So, got into fire protection shortly after graduating from school, designing fire sprinkler systems primarily. And then through the years, just developed interests in other aspects of fire protection, fire alarms, passive systems, that type of stuff. And so currently I work for developers and architects, doing mostly new construction, some remodel and retrofit for older buildings, doing fire suppression primarily, and some fire alarm system depending on the need. Yeah.
Gotcha. So you started with a company and they were doing fire protection systems?
Yeah. So when I got out of high school, I took a gap year and tried to figure out what I wanted to do. And I worked construction throughout when I was in high school. And so after getting laid off around Christmas, after graduation, going and looking for other jobs, worked in a car lot, detailing cars, decided I wanted to go back to school and not work in construction. I just did not want to work construction, especially in the early 80s. You kind of had a pretty poor economy. That was right after the Jimmy Carter years, and so it was, things were not as good as they could be. And so went to school, got out, ended up back in construction, only instead of out in the field, I'm in here drawing plans for the guys out in the field. So that was one plus, but it was still just to be tied into that market is sometimes difficult, especially if things are slow.
Yep.
But,
so with that, you guys are designing the sprinkler systems specifically, or does it go more than that with what you're doing?
Well, right now I work with a lot of architects and developers, so we deal with we have our fingers in a lot of the building aspect as far as, standpipe systems, sometimes rated assemblies, sometimes we get into what's required for fire alarm systems. Even though I might not specifically do the design, we'll still do some consulting in those regards. And so primarily we deal with suppression systems, though I would say that's our bread and butter. But I've got to do a plan to send to the city of Tempe that just shows Knox boxes, which are the little safes that you see on buildings that have the key. That's so the fire department can get into the building. So they have a key to that box that has a building key in it, and there's specific requirements for that. So we get into a little of everything. Fire extinguisher placement sometimes. Normally that's pretty simple stuff, but if there's a fire question, sometimes it comes my way.
Gotcha.
So.
And then is it primarily residential, commercial, industrial, a mix of all three?
All of them, if I can. I don't do too much single family right now. I do a lot of multifamily. It's just that's what's busting right now is
right.
Multifamily. Some small commercial. I've done some good sized commercial at times. I'd like to be more diversified and be more in the commercial end of it as far as doing outlet malls or I don't know. I don't do a lot of big box. Sometimes those are designed out of state by whoever provides that for the
right.
If you're Home Depot, you have usually an architectural team.
They come in with a cookie cutter and they tell you, here you go.
Exactly. So we don't get a lot of that, but through the years I've done Kmart's and Max Clubs when they were Max Clubs. Now they're Costco's. And so, we wish we were more diversified right now, but right now we're just so busy with multifamily. Seems to be the biggest push.
Awesome.
So
have you done single family, like some of the large builds in where they're doing like 10,000 square foot houses and stuff like that?
Oh yeah. So we did. I remember one of the companies I worked for, the owner of Bayliner Boats, and his house was really, really large up in North Scottsdale. There's been a few. Every now and then you'll see a celebrity name on a plan.
Yeah.
But I did a lot of that back in the early '90s.
Okay.
So, but as I've gotten busy with multifamily and commercial, there are guys that specialize in just single family homes, and
Gotcha.
They can do the work a lot better and efficient than I can.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was always, before we move on from the single families, I was curious because I remember it was starting to work in some of those single families and being like, there's sprinklers in here.
Mhm.
Like, at what point do you start, is it required that there's a sprinkler system in a single family home? Because it's, yes, usually multifamily. If you've got high density,
Mhm.
you've got a change in code because if a fire breaks out, you need it to be taken care of. But then
Yeah.
it seems like once you break a certain square footage, is that the rule?
Correct. So Scottsdale, Fountain Hills, Paradise Valley, it's 0 square feet. They require sprinklers.
Oh, really?
Unless you're remodeling, and then they have a,
Like grandfathered in rules?
yeah, if it's greater than, I think, 25%, then you have to sprinkle it. If not, then you don't, you can avoid adding the sprinklers in existing houses. Phoenix and a lot of the other jurisdictions, it's if you're 5,000 square feet, over 5,000 square feet. And that's, I believe, under roof. It includes the garage. It might not count patios, but if it's more than 5,000 square feet, livable plus garage, then you have to sprinkle those. And I believe that's in the IRC, but some of the
What's the IRC?
the International Residential Code.
Oh, okay.
The code that allows, tells them how to build houses.
Yeah.
And so, in Phoenix, I know, though, it's 5,000 square feet. I believe that's the same in Mesa and other jurisdictions.
Okay. And then I did want to ask, and it's kind of just a standard question I have for people, but as far as what was your motivation for stepping out and saying, all right, I'm going to do this on my own instead of doing it with someone else?
Getting laid off all the time. So and it wasn't fired. at least that's what they told me. I got out of school and I worked at summer construction and got laid off. Went to work for another place. Got laid off because they got slow, and I quit the car lot. I just didn't want to wash cars for the rest of my life, and so just realizing that there really is no such thing as job security. I mean, you can situate yourself better than certain situations. In some situations you have it, and some you don't. But so after I got out of school, started working for a sprinkler contractor. They worked there about 2.5 years, and they went out of business. And it came to a point where do I go to work for another company, or do I try to do this on my own? And at that time, I was doing side work for a couple of guys. So I had 2 companies instead of one that I was, obtaining my livelihood from. So I decided to try to do that. There were a few companies that approached me to go to work for them, and shortly after that, they went out of business too. So it just learning that really there is no such thing as job security. I have friends that worked for Honeywell for 20 years and they get laid off because their project gets defunded or something. So I think that's why I decided to have a little bit more control over what I do. I've been underemployed, never been unemployed, but I have been underemployed. Almost everybody was around 2010. But I've always been able to survive, I guess. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Like you working in real estate, it gives you a certain level of freedom, which is good. But then you also have to be disciplined, and that's the more difficult thing to.
It's a double-edged blade.
It really is, yeah. So, yeah.
I think it's so many people don't realize the whole idea as far as it's. I've heard this guy Andy Frisella talk about the risk the same way as far as it's people always think if I have a job it's stable, and because usually in their minds there's a salary or there's an hourly and there's a guarantee to it, but it's like, hey, in 2010 when business owners were hurting because of everything slowed down, so did the employees because they got laid off as well. Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, hey, it's going to happen to everybody. It's just usually business owners try and insulate any of the big waves from the employees. So it's, are you willing to kind of ride the waves, or do you want to be the person who's going to just kind of take more of the easier waves, but like every once in a while something's going to crash on you.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and so, I know firms that went from 200 people down to 15, and even with COVID, you had certain people lose their jobs.
Yep.
That's why they're being asked to come back, and so yeah, it's there's no such thing as security, I guess, when it really comes to that. I know guys, though, have worked in their job their whole life,
right,
and have done fine, too.
Yep.
So there is security, I guess, at a certain level. But
right. It's that level of insulation in between,
yeah,
but it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, they're never a guarantee.
Right. So on the point, though, as far as the market continues to adapt and change, like even just within the last year, we've seen it was forced upon everyone in society, basically, but how have you had to adapt and change with your business, especially in the last 20 years where we've seen things go from everything is now so web-based, and instead of it being, hey, I'm going to drop off plans somewhere, it's check your email because they just got there.
You see, and I think if there's anything good that'll come out of this COVID, what's happened with COVID is we've learned that we don't have to go to an office or go to a conference room and interact with others. I mean, and technology has really advanced when it comes to collaboration with clients. There's several different, platforms that you can work with, WebEx or Zoom or any of them. And that's the hard part, because someone like me, who I don't really drive the meetings, I'm a team member, that you have to be well versed in all these different formats so that you can interact. Most of them are pretty, idiot proof, thank goodness for my case. But and so that's a good thing that's come out of it, because now, it used to be you'd go spend 3 hours at this meeting, and maybe you could do a meeting in the morning and a meeting in the afternoon, and then you had to work late to get the stuff done that you needed to get done.
Right.
And now we're able to. A lot of days I have 3 or 4 meetings, and my interaction is such a small part of the actual building process that I'm able to do some work while I'm listening. And that's the same with mechanical and electrical engineers as well, until it's our turn to give our input. And so that's a good thing that's come out of it, I think. But there's probably going to be some bad things. I think that because people can live and work from anywhere, that's going to change how things are in the city. How I think it's really going to affect commercial businesses quite a bit, just like Amazon is vastly affected the retail industry as far as big box. And look at these malls, they're getting ready to tear down Paradise Valley Mall. Metro Center's done. So you're just going to start seeing a little bit. I think there's going to be some changes when it comes to even office complexes, and that. I think there'll always be some demand for that, but I think you're going to start seeing a less of a demand for it.
Yeah,
I believe.
I'm curious to see in the next year or two, especially as some of these larger corporations start paying attention to the work productivity, because they're so keyed into all their metrics as far as it's like there's stories that you hear from. It's like, oh, my coworker apparently is telling me that they just jiggle the mouse with their foot in the morning so that they can sleep in an extra hour, and it's like, all right. So the working remotely is not going to work in all cases, which in some areas where it's like, hey, it's awesome as far as I don't have to pay for gas, like that's an extra savings, but then it's like on the other side of it for the employer, they're like, all right, are they just moving the mouse, or are they actually putting in the work that we need to be done?
And I really think it comes down to the type of people you work with, too. I mean, I've talked to architects, and they feel their productions has increased working from home. But, there have been times you're reaching out to people, and you're trying to get a hold of them during the day, and they're not available.
Right.
And they're home because of COVID.
Yep.
And so, and it is tough. I mean, working for myself all these years, even through the child rearing years, that was the nice thing. I mean, you could quit right at 5 and go play with the kids, and after they went to bed, come back and work for a few hours to get caught up. But there's always going to be distractions,
right?
Especially if you're working at home, you do get certain distractions. I've worked out of my house for many years and then got an office, and I'm in an office now, I do find I'm more productive in an office. And I was pretty disciplined. I mean, I would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and go to my office, or 7 o'clock in the morning. And so a lot of times I'd work till 5. And if I had deadlines that I had to meet, I would work even later, depending on the situation. So, I always thought I was pretty disciplined, but then you start realizing, you take a week off for COVID and you realize, gosh, I only got about half of what I needed to get done.
Yep.
And so I do find I'm more productive in an office. It just forces me to go and apply it, where with working out of the house, it can sometimes be a little bit more distracting. So,
are there a lot of software systems that have changed the way that you guys do your job, or has everything been pretty uniform for the most part?
Well, when I started, I was drafting on a board, drawing systems, and so once computer-aided drafting, and I took some classes when I was in college, but once it really started becoming more feasible, because it was really priced out for many people, and now it's gotten, with computers being more powerful, you'd spend a fortune on a computer just to run CAD, and now a simple desktop right off of the rack at Best Buy, you can run AutoCAD. Right. So not well maybe, but you could still run it. So yes, there's a lot of new formats always coming, and new releases of old programs. Right now, everything's moving into the Revit 3D galaxy, I guess. And so that is something we haven't moved into yet, but we're going to have to if we want to stay viable as a competitive company. And so right now we're still working quite a bit in AutoCAD. So that's changing. And there are a lot of add-on programs that work with AutoCAD that make those that are specialized for industry specific. So we're looking at moving into that direction, into those. Right now it's tough because most of those are geared towards designers who work for subcontractors. And unfortunately, I work with a lot of different architects. So I have to, and being part of the design team, you have to be able to basically morph as the building morphs. So it's not like we get a set of plans that are already drawn and do the design and then give it to a contractor. We have to work with that architect. And if he's working in Revit or if he's working in AutoCAD, and each one has their own little, unique way of doing things, some of these programs just don't adjust well for that. And we've looked at a few through the years, but I think we found one that's more Revit based that we're probably going to move towards that, because that's the future, Revit. Hydraulics, the programs are pretty much standard now. I don't think that's really changed that much, because we do have a lot of the programs that you buy for AutoCAD will do the hydraulics, but in the old days you drew it and then you went on you either hand calced it or you used a hydraulics program to do it. Yeah, some like Haas or Elite or one of these programs, and so that has changed, but that's kind of stabilized, and now it's going to be wrapped into the whole drawing program itself. It's easier. It saves time. So the tools pretty much have evolved, but it's little steps through the years, and I've been doing this for 35 years, so it doesn't seem like it's been a big change, but over the years, if you look back where you start, it's been quite a change. Yeah.
So then something I do like to ask people as far as like, how have you built your clientele? So obviously you're working with architects, and then I'm assuming there's a design aspect to that. So it's, how did you start to just kind of, was it you started doing the side work and started to kind of just get introduced to people and keep building it along the way? So
when I started doing side work, I was working for subcontractors, sprinkler subcontractors, and so they, I would do those, and then I think what happened is I got in with a developer. It was Evans Withacombe was the developer. They were located in Scottsdale, and they did a lot of multifamily projects. I was doing their designs through one of their subs, and they were looking for somebody to do the designs in-house up front, so that they would go out for bid, and they were trying to get their numbers more accurate, because otherwise you'd just get an architectural plan and each guy would basically bid it the way he thought it needed to be.
Right.
And so and they were having problems, because then if it wasn't the way they thought it would be, they were asking for extras and add services and that type of thing. So so I started working with Evans Withacombe, and they're no longer in there. I think they were acquired by somebody, but and through them I got to know a couple. They hired a couple of different architectural firms, so I got to know them and their principals, and then through that got to know other project managers in the firms, and then those project managers would leave after a while and start their own firm, and before you know it, you start out with one, maybe two, and before you know it, you got 8, and then those architects are working with other multifamily developers or other developers, and you get to know the developers. So if they hire another architect and they don't know who does fire protection, he'll say, well, we use him, call him. So that's really how I've been able to grow my business over a long haul. And I purposely stayed small. I did not want to be, I didn't want to be another big conglomerate. I don't know if there's a demand for it. There's enough guys that do side work and other stuff that would cut into it. But yeah, that's basically how I built my clientele, through long-term relationships. The hardest thing about, I think, any business is meeting expectations. And if you have your expectations of what the client wants is X, but the expectation of the client is 2X,
right,
then you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
So it's better for you to have 2X as your expectation, and they have an expectation of X. You always want to try to exceed what your client's expectation is.
Yep.
And that's why we even though my scope might be suppression systems, if my client wants to know, well, what are you seeing here, or what about this, other aspects of the building process, I'm more than happy to give them that information, because I want to meet or exceed their expectations. And so that's what we've always done, and because of that, I've been able to have some of my clients for over 25 years. So
Dang.
yeah.
So, and then with that, how often is code changing?
It really varies. There's a 3-year code cycle.
Okay.
So we're in a lot of the jurisdictions are in the 2018. There's a couple in the 2015. So about every 3 years. So the next big code section cycle, I think, will be 2021 for the building codes. And then what you have is standards. So you have codes and standards. The code would be like the IRC, the IBC, and then they reference standards. So the code tells you when you have to put it in, but the standards will tell you how to put it in. So for fire protection, they're usually NFPA standards, like National Fire Protection Association standards. So 13 would be fire sprinklers, 72 would be fire alarms, 14 would be standpipes. So there's a standard for each aspect of whatever the need is. And so that is also, I think, on a 3-year cycle. So the 2018 IBC references the following year standard, or the following standard. It wouldn't be the following year. So like the 2018 references the 2016 standards. And so they change every 3 years. And so you're constantly having to update. Now very seldom do they rewrite the code. It's always just little changes here and there, tweaks usually. Although this last year, in 2019, they made a huge change in the NFPA standard where they changed the format altogether. So you can't find anything unless you really know where it's at. Okay. And so that's changed. In many ways, it's gotten better because they've made more sense out of how they do things.
Okay.
Before it was just like, oh, we'll tack it here and we'll tack it there. And now they've got a little bit more. It just makes sense how they've placed it. And the IBC pretty much stays the same. There's constantly testing being done. This building collapse in Florida, it's going to be interesting to see how that impacts building codes, because they suspect it's a waterproofing issue. Florida gets a lot of rain.
Yeah.
And so, and we're doing a lot of podium projects. I mean, we've done projects that are completely underground. Some of them have like swimming pools and parks over the top of them. So it's going to really be interesting to see how that impacts the industry. Because usually something like this happens, and it does. 9/11 impacted the industry. There was a big fire in Vegas years ago, the MGM fire, that changed the industry. So
usually something happens.
Something happens, and you're like, oh, let's look. And we're lucky this hasn't happened before. Usually,
Yep.
So that always changes things. So it's going to be interesting to see how that goes. That's probably the least. I probably have more issues with upgrades with my software than I do with the code, because for one thing, the cities don't adopt the next code right away. So Scottsdale's in the 2015. They'll probably eventually they might adopt the 2021. It really depends if they like it. But normally they do not adopt a code every 3 years because it's too expensive.
Right.
They have to rewrite. There's a lot of work involved in adopting your code, because most cities have their amendments to the code, and so they have to redo that. And so usually I see about every 6 years is when you'll start seeing cities change. Some of the smaller cities, they can go ahead and change every 3 years if they want, just because they don't do a lot of amendments. It's just straightforward. We adopt this code, we adopt that code. Phoenix, for example, they have a lot of amendments, so it's not as easy for them to just jump from code to code every 3 years. So,
right.
Yeah.
I know the electrical code for residential seems to just be continuing to be like, it's like, all right, eventually we're going to need 10 outlets on a 10-foot wall, and everything needs to be waterproofed, even though there's going to be it's just like, all right.
Oh, for cabinets? Kitchens especially.
Gosh,
yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
And it just seems like every year it's like, let's roll out a new one,
Yeah.
It's like, you guys need
and now with arc detection and everything else, it really depends. It's also driven by the technology,
Yeah.
And so now you have a breaker in your house that was $3, and now it's $41 for that breaker because it's got a chip in it, So it's interesting how that goes. But that's just part of progress. I think it's sometimes the good thing with codes, though, if something really doesn't work, they will go back.
Yeah.
So I just ran into this a while back. I was talking to a gentleman, and he said, well, we don't need this. And I said, yeah, you do. It's in the 2000, or I think it was like the 2007 NFPA. And he goes, no, it's not. It's not in the NFPA. I was like, yeah, it was in the 2007. I was certain. And I went and looked in the newer code, because it was, I think this was a few years ago, so it was a 2010 or 2013 code, and it wasn't in there. And they had taken it out, and I didn't know. So once in a while, they will go ahead and make changes that make sense. It really depends on how much feedback they get on
Gotcha.
Some things. Yeah.
And then I know you mentioned this earlier, but how do you structure your schedule to ensure that you're productive? Like you said, there's the flexibility to being the guy who's in charge, but there's also the side where it's, if you start slipping, then the whole ship starts sliding.
Well, and when you're real busy, you really have to stay diligent, because it can get away from you fast.
Yeah.
I've had situations where, Friday will come up and you're like, and then I'll get an email from a client that says, this project's due Monday, and I'll realize we're at 50%. So you end up working the weekend trying to get that to where it needs to be. And so that happens sometimes. Sometimes it's poor communication. Most of the time it's my fault, because I'm not tracking them as closely as I should. And it's hard when you're busy, to go through, look at every schedule every week.
Right.
So there's always that aspect of always staying diligent and really staying on top of what your schedules are. And sometimes it's good, because like right now, we're going into the 4th of July weekend, and we're pretty caught up. So I don't feel like we're in a bad spot. But for the last 3 or 4 months, we've been so crazy busy that you're constantly running from crisis to crisis.
Right.
It's like, oh, this is due, oh, that's due. And so it's just, it's just being disciplined in knowing where you need to be at each time. So
Right.
at that certain time. So it's gotten a little bit easier through the years. I don't work as many all-nighters as I used to. When I was your age, I would work an all-nighter. You know, I was drinking Jolt Cola. Remember Jolt Cola? And working all night and get done at 3 o'clock in the morning because the client said he needed it in the morning. And then this was when I was working for contractors, and so you stick it outside your door for them to come pick it up, and you go out at noon and it's still there. Yeah. It was like, oh, well, that was a waste. Or what usually happens is I will get done and I'll call the architect and I'm going to send you over the plans. They're a little bit late. They'll be there this afternoon. Oh, don't worry about it. The civils needs another week.
Yeah.
Thanks for telling everybody, but they don't. I understand why they don't. They know that if you have another week, you're just going to procrastinate.
Yep.
Most people are procrastinators. So,
Yep.
To me, it's like, well, it's done. So good. You
Yep.
know, I have time to work on something else this week.
I just always find it funny how it works out that if you were to have saved it, they would have been at your house.
Exactly, and that happened. That happened a few times where it's like, oh, they didn't come last time, and then they're like, "Where's my plan?" Well, you didn't come last time.
Yep.
Well, they don't have anybody really to blame themselves. They'll still blame me, but it's and that's the rub, I guess. It's meeting those expectations,
Yep,
right? So,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So then, I know we've talked some about the software already, but how do you weigh and kind of balance your convenience or even the utility with the price of like the tools that you're getting, the software that you're getting, as far as to say, okay, are we going to make the investment in getting this? Like you said, when it was years ago, as far as doing the AutoCAD, like you'd have to be giving up a whole bunch of money to be able to say, hey, if we're going to be moving to AutoCAD, then we're investing. So where do you see that line as far as for you, to where it's like, hey, I've been doing this for 35 years, so I understand how to work around probably almost everything, but then to say it would make life easier or just be better.
Yeah, and that's always the hard part. I remember when facsimiles were really big, and this is really before email, so this really does date me. But I would run. My office was there was like an Office Max less than a mile away from our house, maybe a mile and a half, and so I'd run over there and fax stuff. And finally, what was a fax machine? $300. Finally, found one on sale, bought it, and how it just really improved my quality of life. I didn't have to take 30 minutes to run over and fax something. I could just do it, and I could receive faxes, and so that. Usually in those situations where it's not necessarily a need but maybe would help, it really depends on the how well you're doing financially as far as the business is going, how much work you have, and how much will it save you. Will it save you time? And time is money. I mean, if most of the time if it will save us, if we can do 20 jobs in the time that it's taking us to do 10, it's probably worth it. Right now, the way AutoCAD works and Revit is you pay a subscription. They've gone to a subscription. It used to be able to go buy it, and then if you really wanted to upgrade it, you could pay upgrade fees. But now it's a subscription, so they expect you to pay every 2 or 3 years, depending on how they structure your renewal. And but you save so much time with that. You need that as a tool. They own like 90% of the market share. So you really have to do. No one's hand
drafting anymore.
No, very seldom. Once in a while, I did a few years ago. I did work on a project that was done by an old architect, and he hand drew it.
Really?
Yeah, it was a house, and we ended up inputting it on CAD because we don't even have a drafting table anymore. So so it does happen, but. The way I view it is, if it's going to save me time and it's going to save me enough time to make it worthwhile, then we'll do it. And so, like with this Revit program that we're looking at, I mean, it'll be another subscription so you'll pay your AutoCAD subscription and then you'll pay this subscription, and that's businesses pay a lot of subscription, and then that's not even counting the insurance, the liability insurance, the general liability, the professional liability insurance, the auto, and so there's always somebody with their hand in your pocket.
Yep.
And so it's it's always what'll save me, what'll make me money. I
Right.
think is the best way to look at it. Not so much what will save me money, what will save me time and make me money are the two things that really determine how we approach that.
Right.
So, and sometimes being old school and doing this a long time, sometimes you do suffer along longer than you should. It's like, you make that change. You make that change. It's like, gosh, I wish I'd have done this 2 years ago because
Right.
the results were so great.
Yep.
So, yeah.
I've got an iPad that I'm trying to justify in my mind, and it's just not working.
Well,
So-
I mean, but like even that, like I go into meetings, when we did go into meetings, everybody had an iPad.
Yep.
And I bought one, and I just found that for what I needed to do, I mean, you really have to just set it up
Oh yeah.
to where your business needs it, where you
Yeah.
need it for your business. For me, it was, I can make notes on it. Well, I have a notebook I can make notes on.
Right.
And I look, and then they're written down, and I don't have to worry about whether my iPad has battery life or anything
Right,
else.
yeah.
So to me, it was like, I bought it for work, but I just found out it just really didn't suit where I was at now. Then I don't
Yeah.
know. I mean, it could change, and it usually does. As these iPads get more powerful, they.
Mine was just like a complete like walk by the store and be like, that'd be nice.
Yeah.
And then just
Yeah.
like, nope, okay.
Yeah, it's like good graphics for the gaming,
Oh yeah. Yep. For all the time we have to go gaming.
Yeah.
So, and then something I did want to ask you is, I love people's stories. So, do you have a story of like a project that you're proud of, or just went sideways and it was like, all right, that was a rough one to get out of, and you were just glad to be rid of it at the end?
I there's a few. I mean, you do enough of these. You
Oh, yeah.
really there's projects you think, gosh, I dodged a bullet. Some of them, it's funny. One example, and this was years ago, I did a project in Gilbert, and the plan reviewer beat me up on it. I mean, he just, and we went back and, we just made all the adjustments as he required, and I remember finishing it up, and it got it approved, and I'm thinking, that job is so tight, we're not going to have any problems with it. And so they start building and constructing it, and I get a call from the architect, and what had happened was they had made a mistake, and they thought they could use 13R systems. In fire sprinklers, you have what they call residential systems, and you have commercial systems. And for multifamily, they have a standard that's called NFPA 13R. And there's certain concessions. It's more of a life safety system. It doesn't protect, it's not designed or intended to protect the structure. A lot of times it does, because it depends on where the fire starts. If it starts in the livable space, it'll protect the building. If it starts in the attic, though, it might not, because there's no sprinklers. That's one of the things they'll let you do, is you don't have to sprinkle the attic because there's nobody up there.
Right.
Problem is fire burns through attics, and there's a lot of combustible loading up there. So this was a 13R system, and I thought, this is not going to have a problem with this job. It's going to go smooth. And it came about that they took certain trade-offs for a 13R system that they weren't allowed to. And the head building official was driving by the job, looked up, and saw bathtubs, and they hadn't sheathed or stuck with the walls. And he's like, there's supposed to be sheetrock behind those tubs. Why isn't there sheetrock behind those tubs? And because he knew the construction type and everything, the guy was pretty sharp. And he went in there and said, well, wait, you can't use 13R systems to get rid of that rating,
Right,
fire
yeah.
rating. And so ended up having to go in and try to turn a 13R system, which is already they're starting to put in,
Yep.
into a 13 system, which you can do certain things, but it's like, trying to make a Cadillac a Mustang. It's like,
Yeah.
they're both cars, but they're both different. So that was one project that turned into a nightmare. I mean, I think I was out there every week,
Oh my gosh.
and for about 3 months, and fighting with the inspectors, because even though we were meeting the standard, you also have to deal with cities' interpretations of the standard.
Yes.
So I had inspectors saying, well, no, you got to do this. He goes, that's not what that says. This says here.
Right.
I don't care. I want that.
Yeah.
They're signing off on it. And it got, there were times where it's like, I'm telling the inspector he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Yep.
And going to his boss, and his boss doesn't want to pull the rug out from under him. He wants to back up his employees. So,
right.
It's always creating it. And my attitude is, well, if he's wrong, he's wrong.
Right, yeah.
It got to where even the general contractor was just, don't fight with him, we'll just do it. And we'll just do it. At that stage, they were just like, we just want this thing over with.
Oh, my gosh.
And even though it wasn't my fault, it wasn't the general's fault, it really wasn't the architect's fault, although they should have probably been a little bit more, tight in their code interpretations, I guess. It was one of those jobs that I'll never forget. Because I just remember thinking, this job's going to go so great, and it turned into a nightmare.
Yep.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I know there's always a couple of those jobs where you're like, just looking at it and you're like, will we ever get off of this one? And
yeah,
it's just that long road to get there, but
yeah, and it happens. I mean, a lot of times it's not something you did wrong too that causes the problem.
Oh, yeah.
It's just especially nowadays, as litigious as we are, our society is. You're just your name's somewhere on the plan, and if the owners. I had one project where it was built, and then they sold the building to another entity after about like 8 or 9 years, and there was all kinds of flashing and water leaks and mold, and they sued the previous developer. Well, then they turned around and sued everybody involved in the project.
Right.
And it was a 2-phase project. I had done phase 1, but I hadn't done phase 2, and it really wasn't clear where the problem was. And they sued everybody. And
yep.
So you're having to defend yourself. I mean, fortunately, that was an easy one. My attorney wrote a letter and got us dismissed because it was clear it wasn't our fault. But you still have to hire an attorney. And,
right.
It's still a mess. But
yeah,
yeah.
I remember hearing, I forget who it was telling me that basically it's when you have something go wrong on a project and your general contractor gets sued, it's just automatic that it's basically that's going to get handed off to everyone.
Yeah.
As far as, and it doesn't matter who you were in the process, but it's, hey, now everyone's involved because whoever's responsibility it was.
And it's not even the general contractor's, it's not like he's saying, oh, we're going to sue that guy. It's usually his insurance company or his attorney
Yep.
that says, hey, wait, we got to share culpability here.
Yep.
We got shared culpability, so we need to make sure everybody gets labeled that could be responsible. And so that's why you'll notice in lawsuits it'll say John Doe number 1, John Doe number 2. That's just so they can keep adding people into it.
Yeah.
It's kind of fascinating. And they're really not they don't really care about justice. It's about money.
Oh, yeah.
They don't want to find who was mistaken and you're going to pay. I mean, eventually that probably does come out most of the time, but really it's about, oh, you got insurance? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So,
I did want to ask you, how does your faith influence the work that you do?
Well, I think I try to let my faith impact everything I do, everything. Working in design and engineering, I think we're already called to, there's a certain creed, or as a professional, you're called to do no harm, similar to what a doctor has to do. Our first interest is not money, it's not our client's welfare, it's the welfare of the public.
Right.
Our first. That's why whoever's involved in that building in Florida is in deep.
Yep.
Even though it was 40 years ago. And most of them are dead, I guess, from what I hear. But I always I think I try to always let my yes be yes and my no be no.
Yep.
And sometimes you do make mistakes. I've made mistakes through the years, and being willing to admit it and actually step up and try to make it right. Sometimes it's hard, sometimes you can't. There's been times where I've given money back to clients because they had to pay out something. I had years ago, I had a project in Glendale where we designed it. Glendale was in the 88 code, and this was like 1995, something like that. 96. And so we designed it to the 92 code. Well, the 88 code was just, that was one of those building codes. It was actually the UBC back then. And that was one of those codes that they tried to basically rewrite everything in the code. So it was really a messed up code. Well, I did the design per the 2000, I think it was like the 91 or 94 code. And because this was later in the 90s, and an inspector says, well, you got to put heads in here. It's not required. See right here. Well, we're not in that code. We're in the 88. And so we right away, I went to the chief, Chief Glendale Fire Chief, and said, listen, this is what we've got. You know, we designed it per your code, or per this code, which is the new code, which they were getting ready to adopt. And he said, well, just apply for a variance and we'll give it to you. And so within a very short period of time, we applied for the variance and got it. So it kind of made the problem go away. Problem is the builder, who didn't really have a good relationship with the architect who my contract was with, and the subcontractor, the builder was worried about making deadlines. So he went ahead and signed an extra for the subcontractor to come in and add all these heads that now weren't even necessary. And they did it throughout the project. And at the end of the project, they came back and said, well, the owners, of course, said, well, wait, why am I paying for this extra? And my attitude was, why were you paying for this extra? The only reason you had to pay it was because the general contractor. And the general contractor got real defensive and wanted, you know, everybody to, he basically said, hey, we had to meet these deadlines. It would have held them up a week. They were already behind, so they were using this as an excuse.
Right.
And so my client, my architect, decided to kick in some money to cover the cost of the extra. It wasn't a tremendous extra, it wasn't that much. But because I knew that, I felt like, you know what, it wasn't his mistake, it was mine. And so I just sent him a check for my fee. I just said, no, I'm not gonna, and that was about what he paid, fortunately. Maybe a little bit more, I don't know. The project manager says, no, you don't have to do this. I know I don't, but I'm gonna do it. And to this day, I still have that client. You know, this was back in, like I said, 97, 98, and I still have him as a client. So I just feel like you do what's right, even if it's hard. And that's sometimes hard in business because everybody has a price.
Yep.
You know, everybody has a price. And I guess I probably do too. Maybe I just haven't reached it yet. And that might happen. But, you know, I try to make sure that I do the right thing. And I do the right thing by my clients and by the people I work with. Do I fall short? Absolutely. I think we all do. But, you know, I'm a wretched sinner, so, you know.
Yeah. And then something that is kind of started to interest me recently is just as far as how people kind of have, like, in some ways it's like a self-talk or how they would describe themselves, because internally I feel like for different people there's a way that we kind of view ourselves, especially it's when you own your own business, there is a point to where it's like, yep, there can be a team around me, but at the same time there is still a point where it's like it has to start and end with me in a way. So is there a way in which that you view yourself or view just kind of the attitude that you take into work as far as are you relaxed? Are you kind of like internally, is it kind of like a more fiery, kind of like we're here to get stuff done, or how do you approach that? I think it varies. I think at times. I think sometimes the need is you need a certain level of intensity. Yep. It's like when you're working out, you know. I know a lot of guys who work out and they listen to music they normally don't listen to. They'll listen to really acidy, you know, really hard stuff. And it's to keep that intensity up so they can, you know, get their most out of their workout. And for me, I think it really depends. I mean, it's hard to hold an intensity all the time. I mean, I don't know how you would do it. I mean, other than drugs, and that's not a winning combination. But and for me, Wolf of Wall Streeting it up in here. What's that? We're not doing the Wolf of Wall Street. Oh no, cocaine all the time. Yeah, no, yeah, partying all the time.
I've actually known through the years, you see situations like that. I've gone into architect's office, and every one of the guys on their computer, this is at 2:00 in the afternoon, are playing Doom. They're not working. They're playing Doom on their computers on the network. And I'm like, well, that won't be long. And sure enough, within a year, he was out of business. And so, I think for me, it really depends. Like right now, I feel very relaxed because I'm caught up. Nobody's screaming at me for anything. Going into a holiday weekend, and probably going to be able to take it off without coming back to a huge mess, because that's usually what happens anytime you take some time off working for yourself, because nothing gets done when you're not working. Right. And so, so there's times where, I can be more laid back and not be so, and then there's times where it's like, well, they need this, we got to get it done. Let's, kick some butt. And you really jump in and just really hit it hard. And hopefully you don't have to do that all the time, because I just think that's when you get burned out, So, but for me, I would say I prefer more of a laid back. I think I do better work. Although, I'd say I do pretty well in problem solving. So sometimes, I've had situations where I've had to try to be the hero and have failed. And then there's times where I've tried to be the hero and have been the hero. Right. An example was a few years ago, we sat in a City of Chandler meeting, and one of the inspectors said, we were proposing, this type of system with standpipes and stuff, and Chandler, the inspector says, you can't do that. It's like, yeah, you can. No, you can't. Right away, my client, who's the owner, says, uh-oh, you messed up. Right away, he said, I was like, oh my gosh, here I am with a group of city employees and design team and the owners telling me I messed up. And so I'm driving back, and my architect calls me and goes, so how much is this going to cost us? And I told him, it's not going to cost us anything, because I'm going to push back. And so I came back to the office, and I did a real quick code analysis and just broke it out in the standard where it says, yes, we could do these things. And I sent it to the fire marshal, and she emailed me back and she says, okay, we agree. That's fine. And the problem went away. Yeah. And the architect was like, wow, because they were looking at a pretty substantial extra for that. And so I kind of came away thinking I was the hero. Yeah. But then there's times where, you think, well, they shouldn't be requiring this, blah, blah, blah. And you end up losing those battles sometimes. So you win some, you lose some. But, yeah. So did I answer your question? Yeah. Basically. Yeah. I just I know there's some people where they come in, and for them it's like when work starts, they have to just be like, for them it's trying to turn into this okay, I'm a fire breather here. Or go into beast mode, yeah. Right. And then for other people it's like, hey, I need to just kind of get in a rhythm and let everything just work itself out. And so it's just kind of I'm interested to see as far as how, I love to know how people tick. Yeah. And just kind of all right, where's the headspace? Where's everybody at? Because there's... Yeah. Well, I think there's times where I'll come in and I'll have 3 things come across my desk. All of them are urgent. Yeah. And it's like, okay, take one at a time. I think it's just keeping a level head, because otherwise you can just sit there and oh no, you can spend 30 minutes just trying to figure out what to do next. And what I found is always work the problem. Don't create new problems, just work the problems you have. And if it means taking the easiest one first, and that's usually what I'll do, is I'll take the easiest one first, because now instead of 3 problems and working on the hardest one and still having 3 problems after 2 hours, I could have, after 30 minutes, only have 2 problems, or maybe even only have 1 problem that I can put all my focus in and fix the hardest one last. Yep. And in that situation, you might have 1 person yelling at you at the end compared to having 3. Yeah, exactly. And so, it's just, and at that, when it gets like that, it's work the problem. Don't, stay focused, work the problem, because you don't want to create more problems by just throwing stuff at it, not focusing on what you need to be doing. So, yeah. So, but those are fortunately rare. it does happen once in a while. But yeah, it's hard to go beast mode full time.
Yeah.
At least in this industry, engineers aren't known for being much of a beast anyway. But I know guys are pretty intense. But yeah, it's just I don't want to have a heart attack any sooner than I have to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I know you mentioned earlier, as far as you've intentionally tried to manage the size of your business. So I was going to ask, as far as with your end goal of the business, is it to build it, grow it, or just kind of use this as your source of income until you decide that I'm walking away? Well,
I think it's interesting because as you get older, you start thinking, okay, is this thing just me and I think that's pretty much the approach I've always taken. And then you start realizing, wait, I've got a pretty valuable clientele. Maybe, we do a certain level of contracts per year. It probably is a viable business. But when you're selling a business, you're not always just selling computers or trucks or tools. You're selling contracts and relationships.
Yep.
That's why they almost always want the person to stay on at least for a year or two, and they always make you sign a do not compete clause when you sell a business. I've had several friends that have done that. And so you're really selling relationships until that new owner can develop the relationships that you have. And so part of me feels like really I would like to have something to pass along, either sell it or pass it along to one of my kids or something, or even mentor somebody to take it over. So that would probably be my goal. I've always kind of had I've always taken the approach that we'll keep it going as long as it can. And I don't know if that's the best business approach to take, but I think for me, if things were to go south, I want to be flexible and recognize, hey, is this the end of it? Unfortunately, it hasn't. At one point during the recession, we thought, should I just go to work for somebody? You start putting your resume out there and interviewing, and unfortunately, because everybody was out of work, there's usually no work for you to do anyway. So it wasn't like anybody was hiring. So for me, I think my approach has always been to take it as far as I can and do as long as I'm doing it well. I don't want to grow for the sake of growing. I want to grow under control. I don't want it to be something that gets away from me. Every company, the company I started out with at one point was the third largest subcontractor west of the Mississippi, is what I heard.
Really?
They did fire protection, plumbing, mechanical, and electrical. They were so that's what made them the biggest subcontractor, because they had their fingers in all these fields and trades. And within 3 years or about 2.5 years, actually it was probably about 18 months after being there, the writing was on the wall. I mean, the bank had hired somebody to come in and run the business for the owners because they had so much debt. And they had jobs that were getting away from them. They had employees stealing from them. There was a big investigation, I guess, and this was in the fire sprinkler side, where a couple of the guys foremans were taking pipe off their jobs and going doing side work.
Ooh.
And actually sending laborers over to do the side work and saying, just charge it to this job. Well, then they get done as this job's way over budget, or they've lost all this money on this job. And so to me, it's like, no, I want to be under control. And being a little bit of a control freak, I think you have to be a little bit of a control freak to be a businessman anyway. But it's hard because sometimes you're limited by your comfort zone, and my comfort zone is very narrow. Yes. So yeah, I've always tried to stay small enough that I can control it, not get it away from me. But with the right people, there's no reason not to grow, right? So that's always the kicker. I'm probably not as big of a risk taker as most, so that's probably what's held me back. But, I've always felt like I've got to think of other people. So, I can't be a risk taker. Although, look at these risk takers. I mean, some of them fail 3 or 4 times, but then they hit it big. So,
Yep.
Yeah. Nothing wrong with that either. So.
Nope. All right, before we close it out, I've got 5 kind of quick questions to throw your way.
Okay.
So, what's been the most impactful thing that you've learned?
Well, I wish I could say humility. Because as soon as I say it, it's proven I haven't learned. I think it's just meeting expectations. I think that's why I said it earlier. I really feel like the key to being successful, especially in business, is always making your client feel like he got at least what he's expected. Hopefully better, more than what he
Right.
expected. My grandmother always used to say, always try to get your boss to think he can't get along without you, but never believe it yourself.
Right.
And I think those were pearls of wisdom from a young girl from Oklahoma. And it's true. I think you should always try to make people feel like they can't get along without you, if you can.
Yeah.
Or at least, don't make it obvious that they want to get along without you. It's probably better. So.
What's your favorite movie?
Gosh. I don't know. I was just watching Big Jake with John Wayne, but that's not my favorite movie. I mean, I like John Wayne. I don't know. There's, Tombstone. I think that's probably a good. Unforgiven. I like westerns, but I also like war movies. I like a lot of different genres. So it's hard to say. Maybe for just the sake, because the other night I watched Tombstone again for the upteenth time. There's certain aspects of that movie that are just really good. Anyway. So I'll just say Tombstone for the lack of anything better to say.
Gotcha. What's your first character strength that comes to mind?
Stubbornness, tenacity. I'm very tenacious, I think. I think I had to be because it was hard getting my engineering seal. It was hard.
Yeah.
I didn't do it right out of school. I had to really work at it. And so I think I'm somewhat tenacious in everything. And I'm willing to do the hard work that's necessary if I have to. Not always. Sometimes you got to balance your goal with whether it's obtainable or,
right.
But I would say tenacity is probably.
Yeah.
Probably.
Would you prefer a year of snow with 0-degree weather or a year of 100+ degree weather?
Living in Arizona, okay, so when during the recession, we went to Strawberry, and it happened to be one of the wettest winters they'd had in a long time. I mean, it snowed every weekend. I got so sick of snow and the mud, and it would just start. The snow would barely start going away, and it'd turn to mud, and then it would snow again. And I just realized at that time we were heating with a pellet stove and a wood stove, and just getting wood into the house. You're dragging. It's dirty.
Right.
And so living in Arizona, I think I could handle the heat for a year better than I could handle, because we're already over 100 like 9 months a year anyway. So I think the heat probably. I love cool weather. I love snow. But when you have to work in it, it's brutal. My father-in-law was a mason in Wisconsin, and he shares a story of getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning to drive to Indiana, and it would be like 3 degrees. And he'd be outside working in it at 6 o'clock in the morning, and I just think that's just crazy. That's just brutal. So yeah, the heat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where can people contact you or follow what you're doing?
Well, I'm not on Facebook anymore. I don't have a website. Like I said, I'm stubborn, and sometimes I don't think about what the benefits of things are. I guess I felt like I've never needed a website because of the fact that most of my clientele is word of mouth, and so it probably wouldn't have. We do have a domain name and everything, so I really need to get a website. I just haven't had a chance to put something together.
Yeah.
I have a few people that might help me. So really, the best place is probably with my email address, pyrotech@q.com is my email, and then our phone number is 623-587-9349. So, yeah, but we need to get a website. That's on the to-do list that hasn't moved up too much lately, and it needs to move up faster than it is. So,
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate your
Well,
time.
anytime.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you about real estate, but we'll do that another time.
Well, guys, thanks for listening. If you liked the episode, please subscribe, tell a friend, and until next time, I hope your Wi-Fi stays fast, your hammer accurate, and your work blessed. See you, everybody.